Today I want to share with you the best home remedy for colds and flu, made with simple ingredients I'm confident you have on hand. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning how to be a modern pioneer in the kitchen, consider subscribing to my channel, and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. If at any time you want to jump ahead in this video, be sure to check the chapter timestamps in the description below, and I'll also have a link to the printable recipe there as well. Well, this home remedy can be very soothing whenever we have a cold or a flu. However, when you are sick, be sure to check with your medical professional to make sure you get the proper care you need. Well, this home remedy starts with making a very simple soup, but one that's topped with a very unique mixture that's very helpful and soothing when we have a cold or a flu. First, we'll go over the ingredients that we need to make this simple soup. Then we'll make the soup. Then we'll go over the ingredients that we need to make the unique topping. Then we'll make the topping and put everything together. Now, the first ingredient that we're going to need is some type of fat. I'm going to use ghee. This is basically a clarified butter in which the milk solids have been removed, but you could also use butter. You could use a butter and olive oil combination. You could use some coconut oil, whatever type of fat you like to use to saute. Next, you're going to want some type of spicy pepper. I've got a Fresno here, but you can use whatever you like. You're also going to want about a 2-inch piece of ginger. You're also going to want a full bulb of garlic and 2 lemons. Next, you're going to want to have some onions. I've got spring onions here. You can use yellow onions, white onions, red onions. It doesn't matter, even leeks, whatever you've got on hand. And then you're going to want to have some flat leaf Italian parsley, or at least that's what I have. You can use the curly one too, but I think the flat leaf has a little nicer flavor. And then you're going to want some salt and pepper, plus you're going to need some liquid. Now what I've got here is 4 cups of chicken bone broth, and we've learned how to make chicken bone broth as well as a lot of bone broths together, and I'll be sure to link to that playlist in the description if that's something you'd like to learn. But in any event, as I said, I've got chicken bone broth here. If you don't have any bone broth on hand, and you can use chicken or beef or pork bone broth, whatever you like, you can also use water. It's going to be fine. Now what you want to do is put your soup pot on your stovetop and set it to medium heat, and then you're going to want to just put about, approximately maybe a tablespoon of your fat into your soup pot. This isn't an exact science, so I don't want you to worry about trying to be too exact. As your fat starts to warm up on medium heat, go ahead and start to chop up your pepper. Now, if your hands are very, very sensitive, you can certainly wear those disposable gloves to do this job. But if not, usually cutting up 1 pepper won't be too spicy to your hands, hopefully. Now, a little scraps you have like this, just save these and put them in your scrap bag. If you're making a bone broth and you want a little spice added to it, that's perfect to throw in. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and leave in the membrane and leave in the seeds. That's going to add, a nice spice. If you don't want it to be too spicy, you can take out the membrane and the seeds, and you'll have the flavor of the pepper, but a lot less spice. However, given that we kind of want to, as my mother used to say, open up the flanges when we have a cold or the flu, I'm going to go ahead and leave all the spice in here. Once you get your pepper all diced up, go ahead and add that right into your soup pot with that nice warmed fat. The peppers are starting to sizzle in the ghee. The next thing you want to do is take a spoon and use it to remove the skin or the peel, whatever you call it, from the ginger. And once you get off as much as you can, we're going to go ahead and dice this. And if you have a spoon that's a grapefruit spoon, it has a little bit of the serrated end, the serrated tip. It's wonderful for getting into those little crevices that can sometimes be a little hard to get the skin off. And basically, you just want to go ahead and chop this as finely as you can. Well, I chopped up this ginger, and now I'm just kind of running my knife back and forth over it to try to chop it as small as I can. Once you get your ginger finely chopped, go ahead and add that in with your peppers. Then just go ahead and mix your ginger around with the peppers, sauteing everything. You're going to get a wonderful aroma. I love ginger. And it's perfect for a soup when you have a cold or a flu, because it has so many wonderful healing properties. It's antiviral, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and things like garlic and turmeric and onions and spicy peppers. All of these things have been extensively studied by scientists, and they have shown that they can be helpful at easing symptoms, of colds and flus. And I'll be sure to link to some of those interesting studies in the blog post that'll correspond with this video. And I also want to mention in the description below, as well as in the corresponding blog post, I'll also link to my home remedies playlist. And I have many recipes for making all sorts of things. And I have master recipes that show you how to make herbal teas and herbal salves and herbal oils and herbal tinctures and a whole host of other remedies, including an ancient remedy that starts with onions that so many of you have told me that is actually very tasty and very helpful when you have a cold. So I'll be sure to link to all of that. But basically what you want to do now is take your whole head of garlic and you want to cut it. What would this be? Lengthwise or crosswise, and just do the best you can. And once you get through it, we're going to only put half into our soup pot. Now don't throw out these garlic skins, because these are very rich in nutrients, just like the garlic. So you can save them for the second step that we're going to go into when we make the topping, or you can simply add these to your scrap bag and use them whenever you want to add some garlic flavoring or nutrients to a bone broth that you may be making. I generally don't. I think I've shared with you in the past that I find the long simmer of the garlic in a bone broth can sometimes become a little bitter, but for other purposes, even if you're making an herbal tincture or something like that, I love saving all of my garlic skins. Now this half of the garlic I'm going to set aside for now, and I'm going to take this half, I'm going to go ahead and put this in my soup pot. I'm going to put it cut side down. Some of the garlic's already falling off. I'm going to put it cut side down just to start warming the garlic, but I'm going to keep a close eye on it. You don't want to walk away from this. Nobody wants burnt garlic. And I'm just going to let that start to warm up and take on a little color and release some of its flavor. And if some of the cloves fall out, don't worry, that's perfect. Now we're going to go ahead and cut up some of our spring onions. As I said, if you're using some type of other onion, that's fine too. If you do have the spring onions, leave a few aside because those can be very pretty to add fresh into the soup. And when things like garlic and onions and other ingredients are cooked, they can sometimes help release certain nutrients and make them more bioavailable to our digestive systems. But sometimes, such as in the case of vitamin C, cooking it can also destroy some of the nutrients. So it's kind of, a double-edged sword. But what I like to do is at this point, since I'm using the green onions, I'm going to go ahead and just start to chop these up, and just small little pieces. Again, this is not an exact science. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And I'll go ahead and add those into our soup pot. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in all of my chopped green onions. As you see, it's getting away from me. They're just tiny little pieces, about, what would you say, about a half or a quarter inch. Nothing fancy. So once you get your green onions in, just start to stir everything around. Get them nice and moistened by the fat that you've got in your saute pan. At this point, I like to turn the garlic over, and the bulbs, it's been warmed, so the bulbs are going to start leaching out into your soup, which is perfect. But don't worry, if some of them don't, that's fine too, because you'll see what we're going to do. Now you want to go ahead, just saute everything up, for about a minute more or so. Then go ahead and add in your liquid, whatever liquid you're using. Sounds good, nice sizzle. Now we're going to bring this up to a boil, and then we'll turn it down to like a medium or so, and we're going to let it simmer for about 10 minutes. So we're just going to let our soup simmer covered for about 10 minutes. But I wanted to mention that if you used green onions in this recipe, save the root. You can put this in a little glass of water and it'll start to sprout, and you'll have new spring onions or new green onions. You can also put it right into some dirt in a flower pot or right into your garden, and it'll start to grow green onions, and you may not even ever have to buy them again, which is nice. And if growing vegetables from scraps interests you, I'll be sure to link to a video I have, I'll put it in the description below, where I show you how to grow a lot of vegetables from scraps. Alrighty, now let's go over the ingredients that we're going to need for our topping, the topping we're going to put on our soup. And basically what this is somewhat of a version of a pistou, P-I-S-T-O-U. It's a French term, and generally when the French make a pistou, what they're making is something that has basil, olive oil, garlic, and it's whirled all together, and then it's put as a topping on a soup. Now we're going to make our pistou a little differently. And the reason is I want to bring in some ingredients that really help us feel better, help kind of maybe relieve a little bit of our symptoms when we have a cold and a flu. So yes, we're going to have the garlic, of course, and yes, we're going to have the olive oil, but we're also going to use some ginger and some hot pepper. I've got a jalapeno here. You could use another Fresno like I used in the soup, whatever type of hot pepper you like. And I'm going to go ahead and use some fresh parsley instead of basil. And the reason is that generally when we come down with colds and flu, it's in the winter. And basil is usually not in season in the winter. Yes, you might be able to find it at the grocery store, but you're going to pay a pretty penny for it. And usually in the cooler months is when your flat leaf or your curly parsleys are going to be in season. And they're usually just generally very easy to find any time of year at the grocery store and for a reasonable price. Now, what about these lemons? Well, we're going to use the lemon juice from these lemons in our soup, but we're not going to put this in while it's on the heat because we want to preserve as much of the vitamin C as possible. I don't know if this is just a wives' tale or if it's true, but my mother always believed that food was best eaten closer to room temperature than very hot. She would always say, oh, very hot food may cause infection or something like that. It might just be a wives' tale. But what we do know is that if we heat foods that contain vitamin C at very high temperatures, it does destroy some of the vitamin C. So we're going to let our soup cool down to a manageable, palatable temperature, and then we're going to go ahead and add in our lemon juice. However, we're also going to have the zest, the pith, and the pulp left over. So what we're going to do is add the zest and the pulp to our pistou. So we're really creating something that's incredibly nutrient rich, nutrient dense, but something that also has such a host of ingredients in it that have antiviral, antibacterial, and anti-inflammatory properties. Now, what about the pith? The pith is the white part of the lemon or of any citrus, and it's very bitter, but it's also very nutritious. I don't mind the pith, so if I was making this pistou just for me, I would go ahead and add in the pith. However, if you do find it bitter, don't throw it out. Just save it and set it aside. You can put it in your refrigerator or your freezer, and you can use the pith when you make homemade bitters. And if you've never made bitters before and that's something that you'd like to learn how to do, I'll be sure to link to my video where I show you how to make bitters in the description below. They're very easy to make, and using pith in a bitter is very appropriate, citrus pith, because as the name implies, it is bitter, but you want it to be bitter because the tiny little bit that you take helps improve your digestion and hopefully tamp down indigestion. Now I'm going to start preparing the ingredients for our pea stew, and I'm just going to basically push the garlic bulbs or the garlic cloves out of the bulb, but I'm not going to worry about being too exact about it. You don't need to get the skin out. As I said, the skin is very nutritious and has the same level of ingredients that the actual garlic clove does. And I'm going to leave the skins on because of that, and it'll be fine because what we're going to be doing is blending all of this in a blender. And you can use any blender that you have. You don't need a high-speed blender. I'm just going to use my regular old blender. If you have a food processor, you could also use that. And if you're exceptionally skilled, you can always chop all of this as fine as possible, and then using like a mortar and pestle or even a bowl, if that's all you have, you can start adding in and whisking in some olive oil and make your pea stew in a very traditional, old-fashioned way. If I have any cloves of garlic that have a very hard root here on the bottom, I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. And now I'm just going to go ahead and get the skin off of this ginger. This is actually an organic ginger, so if you have organic ginger and you want to leave the skin on, that's fine too. It's going to be well pulverized in the blender. But even so, I'm just going to go ahead and remove it. It's not very difficult to do when you have a spoon. And the nice thing about making a pea stew, whether it's the traditional one or something like what we're making here, is that cooking food is wonderful. It makes it very easy for us to digest. When it's warm, it's very soothing to us, especially if we have a cold or a flu. The bone broth is very soothing to our digestive system, helps us absorb all the nutrients. But it's also good to have some raw foods that you're adding into your diet as well, especially when you're trying to get better, from a cold or the flu. And the reason is raw foods contain enzymes that would otherwise have been damaged by heat. And enzymes serve a lot of purposes, and one is to help us better digest our food and absorb nutrients. So it's always nice, especially, whenever you look at traditional cultures or traditional recipes, you will find that it's almost like inherent that our ancestors knew the best way to mix foods together for optimal nutrition. And that's exactly what we're going to do here today. Now this is all going to be going into my blender, so I'm just going to chop this into pieces that make it manageable for it, so it doesn't have to work too hard, but I don't need to be as precise in the chopping as I was for the soup, where we want it to be a little more palatable. Now this is a large jalapeno, but I'm going to go ahead and use all of it. I'm going to save this top in my scrap bag, and I'm also going to include the membrane and all of the seeds, because again, I do want something that is nice and spicy to help make breathing easier and sort of, as I said earlier, open up the flanges. Whenever you eat spicy foods, even when you're feeling great, you might find your nose runs a little bit, and that's exactly what we want, though, when we're not feeling well. We want to get all of that infection out of us. So again, I'm not going to be too precise since all of this is going into the blender. Now basically I'm just going to use a potato peeler to remove the zest. You could even zest the zest if you wanted, but since we are putting this in the blender, I'm not too worried about it being super small. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this zest off because that's going to be part of our topping, and just go ahead and add that into our pile here of things that are going to go in the blender. Now this is the pith, the white that we're seeing, and some of it is going to be on the zest, especially if you use a potato peeler like this. It's not a perfect system, but I don't worry about it. If you are concerned about getting any of the pith into your topping, then you can use one of those little microplane graters, which will really control exactly how much zest you're getting off, and it's very good at leaving the pith behind. Now I'm just going to take a little bit of this fresh parsley and set that aside. Also, I'll chop a little bit of that up to sprinkle on the soup along with the green onions. But then this is going to be the base of our pea stew. But the nice thing is the blender is going to do the bulk of the work for us. And we're also going to include the stems, so nothing's going to go to waste. But I'm just going to give this a very rough chop. Well, our soup has simmered for about 10 minutes, and it looks terrific. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to pull that garlic out. That's why I kept it whole. And we'll see what other little cloves are in there. If they're real softened, I'll just mash them on the side of the soup pot. But if there is some that's still intact, I'm going to add that to our topping that we're going to put into the blender. And the reason is it's a nice combination to have not just the raw garlic, which can be somewhat strongly flavored, along with some cooked garlic that can have a sweeter flavor. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and set this soup aside and move my cooktop out of the way and bring the blender in. So now everything that we prepared, we'll go ahead and put into our blender. We've got all our garlic, our jalapeno, our lemon peel. This is going to be great. Now I'm just going to loosen this little top to my blender, whatever type of blender you have. You just want to have some area where you can start to little by little pour in your olive oil. And that's why I was mentioning earlier, if you have a food processor, it'll work great in that too. So what I'm going to start is I'm just going to put this on low and get it starting to blend, and then I'll start adding in the olive oil. At this point, I have about a half a cup of olive oil in here so far, and doing this in the blender, you probably will, like I'm doing, have to stop it halfway through and mix it a little bit, push some of the greenery down. And at this point, now that we've got this going, I'm going to remove the lid to the soup and I'm going to fish out some of the cooked garlic. So I fished out some of the garlic that still was in sort of the main part of the bulb, and it's so aromatic. I'm going to go ahead and add that into our mixture. Then at this point, I'm going to go ahead and add in about a teaspoon of salt. You could always wait to add some salt later if you like to limit your salt, but the salt really does help with the flavor. Now, in terms of pepper, I do have that large jalapeno in there, and I've got a Fresno in the soup, so I don't think I'm going to add any additional black pepper at this point. We'll wait to taste. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a little more olive oil just to kind of top that off, and then we'll go back to blending, and then we'll see how much more olive oil we need to add. Well, I added probably about a total of 1 cup of olive oil. It's really going to be a matter of you just keeping an eye on it and getting it to the consistency that you think is the most pourable and will mix well when put on top of your soup and then mixed in with your soup. Now I'm just going to take a little taste of this. I got a clean spoon here, and I'm going to take a little taste to see if I think it has enough salt. That is so tasty. I might go ahead and add just a little bit more salt to it, but it's wonderful, and it's really not overpowering. The parsley has helped tremendously to temper some of the pepper and some of the garlic so that you don't feel completely overwhelmed. It's spicy, but pleasantly so. Now, before I ladle some of the soup into the bowl and top it with the pea stew and give it a taste, we'll see how it all comes together, I just want to mention that this is enough to probably last you a week. And hopefully at that point you're feeling better. And you can store this in your refrigerator. This would probably even stay fresh for about 2 weeks in your refrigerator, but you could also make this in advance of even having any cold or flu, and then just freeze this in little ice cube containers. That would be wonderful. And then when you don't feel well, it's easy to pop one out and defrost it and top your soup with it. And you can really use this to top pretty much any soup. It's very flavorful. Now, the first thing that I want to do is cut these lemons in half, and we're going to squeeze the lemon juice into our warm soup. And you can do this, I'm just going to use my hand, but you can certainly use a little mesh strainer so you don't get any seeds in there. Now, if you had decided that you wanted to use the pith as well as the pulp in your pea stew to give it a little bit of a lemony flavor, you could certainly do that. But again, as I said, the pith does have that little bit of bitter flavor. So if you want to leave that aside, that's fine. But you could also cut your lemons in advance. Oh, I think a pit just went in. I got to fish that out. You could squeeze your lemons separately, put the juice aside, and then scrape out the pulp and go ahead and put that in the blender as well. I decided I'd just leave it as is. I kind of like the real garlicky flavor that this mixture has. Kind of garlicky, a little spicy, even a little herbaceous, as they say, a little green. And I didn't want to overshadow it with too much lemon flavor, since we're going to have some nice lemon flavor in the soup. But be sure to save these. You can go ahead and put these in your scrap bag, and they can serve as the acid, I'm squirting over there, as the acid when you're making bone broth. I like to use like a little fermented. I like to use some vermouth or something like that, but you can also use some vinegar. You just want to use a little smaller amount than if you're using a wine or a fortified wine like a vermouth. But you can also use citrus. Again, you don't need much. And just throw those in your scrap bag. And then when you go to acidulate the water, when you're soaking your bones, just go ahead and throw those in. They're perfect. I love it. Nothing goes to waste. Well, this soup looks just wonderful. The garlic cloves that slipped out of the garlic bulb, I just kind of mashed those right in. They were beautifully softened. So I think it's going to make this a very tasty soup. Now I'm going to take a generous amount of our pea stew and just do a wonderful dollop right on top. Oh my gosh, this looks so good. Well, I'm just going to get a spoonful of this along with some of that beautiful bright green. It just really brightens the soup. Now, you could also put some chopped onion on top, as I mentioned, some of the spring onion, a little bit of the chopped parsley. You can do all of that. It's especially nice when you don't feel well that the food looks really appetizing. But I'm just going to go ahead and taste this and see how it came out. Oh, that's so good, and it feels so warming, and the lemon in the soup is wonderful. The pea stew is wonderful. It's so flavorful, and that's especially important when you don't feel well, because your taste buds sometimes, because of your nose being stuffed, your taste buds don't taste as well as they do when we're healthy. This is going to wake up your taste buds, and it's definitely going to get you breathing better. Now, if you'd like to learn about how to make more home remedies when you have a cold and a flu or other various ailments that can bother us from time to time, be sure to click on this video over here where I have a playlist showing you how to make all kinds of things. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.